Hello, everyone, and welcome to Stress Free IEP, the show where we help families build their village so they can raise their neurodivergent children with confidence, clarity, and support. I'm your host, Frances Schefter, special education attorney, advocate, and fellow parent, walking this journey with you. Whether you're joining us live on Facebook or YouTube or listening later on your favorite podcast app, we're so glad you're here. Now let's dive in and meet today's awesome guest. Sarah Juliana is an educational therapist, certified special educator, and board certified special education advocate with more than 12 years of experience supporting neurodivergent students. She is the founder of Autonomous Hippopotamus, where she combines professional expertise and lived experience to provide individualized, strength-based support for neurodivergent learners and their families. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So happy to have you. So,
sorry.
Autonomous Hippopotamus. It's okay. Autonomous Hippopotamus. Tell me about it. Where did you come up with the name? I love it. And, what's it all about?
Okay, so I originally made it as a sticker. And then when I made my business, I was like, this describes exactly like the whole sticker. So that became my logo, what we do. I wanted to, kind of show that, reflect neurodivergent people, how, we're different. So like, I feel like our world has become very kind of not so vivid in a world where everything is kind of being produced by AI and things like that. So I really wanted it to show how our brains are different and how we view the world and how it's different, if that makes sense. But also, since then, I actually found out that, so my website's Autonomous Hippo, there's actually something in the brain called Autonomous Hippo. And then somebody also at my last resource fair brought to my attention that it sounds like hippocampus. So I was like, okay, well then, it was meant to be.
Yep. I love that. I love when things like just kind of fall into place like that. And it just interesting. So Autonomous Hippo is an actual thing. Do you want to go into that a little bit, or is it?
Honestly, I don't, it's a little complicated, but
I was going to say it's probably something rare because I haven't heard about it either.
Yeah, the brain's very complicated and there's a lot of things going on that, even neuroscientists don't understand fully yet. So yeah.
100%. Yeah. I had my daughter's orthopedics. We were talking about autism at one point. She's like, yeah, there's so much about the autistic brain that nobody knows anything. And I'm like, yep, that's pretty much, and that's with all of our neurodivergent children, with brain in general also, like, it's so complex to know, you can't know everything. And, as we always say, or I always like to say, when you've met one autistic child, you've met one autistic child. But that goes to anyone. Like when you've met one 2-year-old, you've met one 2-year-old, because we all process and develop differently.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's where like the concept of neurodiversity comes in. A lot of people kind of get confused, I think, between neurodivergence and neurodiversity. And I think that neurodiversity is important. It's important to acknowledge that even those that appear neurotypical, still their brains are still different. They might learn differently than someone else, and have different lived experiences. So I use the term neurodivergent to particularly talk about those of us whose brains are even more divergent and different than the neurotypical. So it's more complex than just learning differently.
Right. It's interesting we say that when I had my children, both my girls, evaluated, I told them like how I prepped them for it. It's like, oh, we're just, everybody's brain works a little differently. We're just going and figuring out how your brain works. Which they, understood. But then when I was talking to them about the diagnosis and what it meant is like, is that your brain works differently. My older one, of course, but Mom, you said everybody's brain works differently. I'm like, you are right. But some people's brain work differently in different ways than in neurotypical ways. And she's just looking at
Mm-hmm.
me like, huh? I'm like, it's a little complex, but it
Mm-hmm.
is like, it's just,
Mm-hmm.
but again, like that goes to the whole thing about labels, and don't even get me started on labels, because I have a I have a problem with labels, like we're all stuffing
Mm-hmm.
people into autism. We're stuffing people into learning disabilities. We're stuffing people into
Yeah.
emotional disabilities. And there's such a wide variety of all that you
Mm-hmm.
can't say, oh, here's a group of autistic people. This is what we need to do. This is how we need to do things,
Yeah.
because everybody's profile is different and there's so much
Yeah.
overlap in all of them.
Yeah, and I something that I really think about a lot, especially in my practice, is the idea that right now all of these neurodivergents, and particularly ones that are more have a more disability component to it, it's all viewed behaviorally,
Yeah.
and somebody could present with autistic behavior, but it could the root cause could be something completely different. And I mean, usually it's neurological, or in our brain, but a lot of things can look that way. So how it our supports cannot be one size fits all. We can't
Right.
just say based on how someone's acting, oh, you're this. So it's like kind of meaningless a lot of times. So, and autistic people especially, our supports are very limited. So yeah, it's a whole thing.
Yep. No, exactly. And like looking at how even on the DSM-5s that psychologists use, how that has all morphed to different things. Like, there used to be, and I always say it wrong, DMDD, disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, and
Mhm.
ODD, oppositional defiant disorder, which
Yeah,
now people are discovering that's not what it is. It's now more autism with a pathological demand avoidance,
yeah,
profile, which some people believe and some people don't believe, but it's what it is, which is what makes it hard, because it doesn't matter whether you believe in PDA or not. Here are the
mhm,
characteristics of this child.
yeah,
And because our society has to put them in a circle or a square or a triangle or whatever they need to put them in, that's the group that's what we've decided to call it. Um,
yeah.
but again, everybody shows differently. And so is it a behavior or is it an underlying issue?
I mean, our behaviors, when you think of the brain, it's I have kind of a scientific, rigid view. So it's not that,
That's okay.
oh, consciousness and all this. So very, but so our sensory, it's basically like a computer, like you put input in, it processes it, and then there's output. Behavior is the output.
Yeah.
So we need to consider the sensory input. We need to consider the processing. I mean, that's where most of this happens. Behavior is just a result of all that. So it doesn't
Yeah.
really tell us that much, but it is important because that allows us to at least kind of see in a little bit and know where to even start, or where to kind of like what is possibly going on, and how can we provide supports for that. And I think people oversimplify it.
Yeah.
And I wanted to say too about the ODD portion. I've worked with a lot of kids, different populations of students. So sorry if some of my language is kind of clinical, but
It's
um
okay.
so but I actually do think there is a difference between PDAers and ODD, because but they get confused, and that's a huge issue, um because like I find that there's very different characteristics. Usually PDAers tend to have very low confidence, and a lot of times those who are actually fall into that more oppositional defiant category. And I do think there's a lot of people misdiagnosed or mislabeled. But true ODD like tends to be more I want to say like when they grow up tends to look more maybe like less empathy for people. Maybe they're overly confident. But so I do see that in some students, but a lot of times too, there's this gray area. And yeah, I hate the name pathological demand avoidance. I know that there's a more neuroaffirming name, pervasive demand for autonomy, I think. I don't really like
either. It's pervasive drive for autonomy. Yep.
And I don't like either, because the pervasive drive for autonomy, I feel like, discounts the struggles we have. And I think that it's not really even about demands. You know, we need to look way past that. This is something about myself, as I get more interested in PDA and wanting to help that population and realizing students in the past I've worked with, I told my mom about it, and she goes, "Oh, that sounds just like you." When you were a kid. And it's interesting, in 6th grade, I was actually diagnosed with ODD, which obviously doesn't make sense. So I'm like, okay. And for me, I'm very sensitive to criticism, and some demands a lot, but it's not about that. I don't really care about being held accountable. It's more about this weird, for no reason, fight or flight response, because I feel like I'm getting attacked. So, you know, it's awful. So I think people really misunderstand it. PDAers often have low confidence, often have uneven cognitive profiles, which basically means that in some academic or cognitive, like executive functioning kind of areas, they might be really strong. But then there's others where they need a lot of support, like maybe there's dyslexia happening or autism, and it's more, for lack of a better word, disabling. I can't think of the right word right now, but, or impacts them more. So this in our school system tends to basically say, you know, make them feel stupid, but they know in their head that there's a disconnect, you know, and they're like, but I don't feel stupid, you know, but why is this happening? And they keep making me feel stupid. And now they're making me do these things that, you know, basically, I mean, it creates like a sense of school or autistic trauma. And PDA, I do see mostly in autistic people. And it's interesting because I've had parents tell me that it starts from the beginning. And I can totally vibe with that. My mom said, yeah, we brought you home from the hospital, you slept, and then you never slept for the first year. I was a very agitated baby. And I think it's, you know, I believe it stems from interoception, which is your sensory, internal kind of sensory pathway that communicates what's happening in your body. And honestly, to this day, I feel like that is probably my biggest challenge as far as sensory goes, because you might feel a lot of pain and you don't know what it is. So an infant just cries, but you can't, you know, it's like you eat and then, but it's still not quite and then you have imagine like having all these, you know, sensory, like things are really bright, things are really loud, you know, and your body is going to kind of develop, in a sense, a form of developmental trauma, not from people, but just from the intense sensory experiences. And that's, I think, why a lot of, not even just PDAs, but a lot of autistic people have meltdowns. These are like stress responses. We come into this world with a supercharged nervous system, which also can be good because our brains, you know, if we have more energy in our brains, like I think that's how we can tap into really profound abilities. But there's also a lot blocking that. And that's really what I'm interested in. So.
Yeah. And it's like, I love that you say that, because it's true. Like there's definitely ODD, there's definitely DMDD, there's definitely PDA. And there's so much overlap. And, it's interesting. I always say, autism, ADHD, and anxiety. There's so much
Yeah.
overlap between the three. I rarely see only one, and more often than not, I see three. When my own children were diagnosed, my PDAR, they thought there was ADHD, so they dug deeper, but said, nah, they think it's autism with PDA. My younger one, the ADHD, they thought they saw some autism, and they dug deeper, but then they said, nah, it's ADHD, which to me, I took a step back and I'm like, okay, so now looking at it, is this true ADHD, true ASD with PDA? Are they overlap? Are they learned behaviors? Because that's how their father and I behave. There's just so much there and so many other factors that is it true? We don't know. And so forcing kids into these labels is so frustrating, but it's necessary because of the way the laws are written and the way to get supports and the way to get federal aid and special education and all that other stuff. You have to fit into one of these categories.
Yeah. And even for me, as an educational therapist and teacher, categories can help, but I think what matters more is more of a cognitive behavioral profile. So as an educational therapist, we do not diagnose. We are not mental health therapists. We are not psychologists. We can't diagnose, but I think that's a beautiful thing because what I can do, I can interpret assessments and I can say, I'm not going to label someone. I'm going to say, well, they have needs in this particular area, strengths in this particular area, and, just kind of leave that label out, behind. And I mean, but sometimes, I do use kind of a mentorship approach and people do kind of associate autism with their identity more and more. So, there's in that way, you just kind of have to are we talking about more of an identity? Or are we talking about a clinical diagnosis? There is a difference. So yeah.
Or the educational impact, because that's the other thing is psychologists in schools can't diagnose, but they can say has characteristics like someone with autism. And so that's how they're able to get the educational autism. It's so frustrating. That's that fine line that I always have to talk to clients about and, parents, and I try to put out there. There's medical diagnosis and there's educational impact. And just because you have a medical diagnosis of autism doesn't mean you have an educational impact of autism, and vice versa. I mean, I've had schools say it's got autism characteristics, so we're going to put the code as autism because that's where this child fits the best. But doctors are like, he doesn't have autism and aren't medically diagnosing it. So it's just kind of like that. It's weird, but it's just there are those different categories. And again, it's what are we looking at and what are the needs?
Yeah. And something I've noticed as a special educator, looking at a ton of IEPs in my career, looking at assessments now, as an educational therapist, it seems like there is a bias towards making autism the primary disability. We're not looking at the whole picture. So someone really could, the autism could present not as impactful, but maybe there's a lot of trauma and that's what's really impacting them. But, or ADHD, whatever, maybe they're severely dyslexic and that is what's really preventing them from learning. But this other stuff isn't so much. But autism is always the primary diagnosis when we're looking. I don't want to say diagnosis, but when we are talking about special ed support. And that's hard for us.
The disability code. Well, it's important. Most of, at least what I've seen, is a lot of places require you to pick one. Some allow multiple disabilities, but what's the primary disability code? And that's taking the step back. And what is the primary disability? Because there can be 3 or 4, but what's impacting it the most? I tend to push for autism to be, if there's autism there, because of all the complexities of autism. If you put on learning disability, even if that might be the primary, all the sensory stuff like kind of gets left behind, and that causes a
Yeah.
problem. And as much as we develop the IEP and everybody always says, oh, code doesn't diagnose. Look, I was a teacher. I was in the classroom for 7 years. When I was in gen ed, I got, my 38 kids, 28 kids, I don't remember, 10 IEPs. Yeah, I read them. I looked at them. What do I remember? The code. It's about it. I'm not going to remember 35 pages on each child, unfortunately. And so that's what becomes reality. And it's just, we all say, we'll put it in the IEP, we'll get it in the IEP, the supplementary aids, we'll talk about it in the IEP. But it's like, I get that, but like teachers are overworked enough. We can't expect teachers to understand and get it all if it's on page 4 in this little paragraph up here on the IEP. They're going to read it. They're going to, okay, great. But in reality, when they're implementing every day, it's not going to be, wait a minute, this child has this might be going on instead of that. A behavior is a behavior. And unfortunately, schools are very behavior driven. If you have a behavior, we're going to react. Setting proactive things to avoid the behavior is the more difficult part.
Yeah. And schools aren't equipped. So I just kind of, out of just sheer luck, discovered educational therapy because I think there might be only 5 of us in Maryland. It's definitely a California thing. It's been around for 50 years as of this year. So like our membership credentialing organization has been around 50 years, and it's really just starting to get out. But one thing as an educator, it really frustrated me was there wasn't any place to really actually help these students. So you see these students like having these behaviors, but you can't think about, okay, what is that underlying cause? Yep. So and also educators are not trained in all this stuff. So with a lot of times, not trained in how we learn. They're not trained in neuropsych principles. And it's so hard to be able to plan a lesson if you don't understand how the brain works, in my opinion. But I was glad that I was able to find something that, kind of validated me, because I felt like, oh, maybe I'm looking at it wrong. So we need these outside supports too, because it's just impractical in a school to do all that.
Right. And that's the thing, like we were saying, with behavior and looking at behavior, I have always said behavior is communication. And from my teaching days, I always said kids misbehave for 2 reasons in school. One, they're so lost, they have no clue what's going on, and they're embarrassed or they're trying to hide it. So they're going to act out. Or they are so completely bored, they are just bored and like, I'm not going to do this work. I know how to multiply. Why am I doing this addition stuff? Like, this is ridiculous. And so there's the behavior. And that's the problem, is we're not digging in and truly looking at what is causing this behavior. What's the reason for this behavior? We're doing functional behavior assessments and then behavior intervention plans. And I'm like, you're not going to change the behavior if you don't truly understand what the function of the behavior is and what the trigger is. And the people doing FBAs, unfortunately, aren't always fully trained on what to look at. Like I've seen FBAs that say, oh, well, we told them to do a math project, and that's when they exploded. So the trigger was the math project. No, it might not be. What happened for the days before? You know what I mean? Like you said, our nervous system is overloaded. It's not the math project. That was just like the little straw that broke the camel's back.
And they have a name. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
My conversational back and forth abilities are not the best. So there, I always forget what it's called, but when we're looking at ABC data, so antecedent behavior consequence, I do like that, because at least, like I said, it's kind of a window to kind of get an idea of how, like, what we need to look for. But there's also, I think it's called setting conditions, and they never talk about setting conditions. That would be like, say, a kid walks in your classroom and they like start cursing the teacher out. The antecedent might have been walking into the classroom, but their nervous system was kind of set up for that experience. Maybe they were on the bus and got bullied and they're all charged. Maybe they had a fight at home. Maybe like they had a conflict with a teacher in the previous class. So it's kind of like, what do they bring into this classroom? And it is the thing, setting conditions, but I don't know how many people really think about that or even know the term. But that is, if you ask like a BCBA or BCBA, like that is a thing. But I think, and also when I worked in a program, when I was actually involved in helping create a BIP for my student, they had, the sheet that the observers used was like a checklist, and it just listed like certain common behaviors, and of course it was through a school lens, so like they don't want to do, it happens when they do a non-preferred activity, like I hate that one.
Yeah.
So instead, why aren't we saying, oh, it's not preferred? Well, why don't we make learning should be a preferred activity? So there's a breakdown in how we're teaching and going about it. Human, that's what makes us human. I think we love to learn. So when you take that and make learning look like work, that, it's just awful.
Yeah. It's bringing me back to with my daughter. She was having a difficult time in math. And so they were like, well, math is the trigger. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. This is a kid that excels in math. Like, This is not, math is not the trigger. And me, with my education, my background, whatever, and I'm like, well, let's look at what's really going on. Mm-hmm. And it turns out, well, math was right after lunch and recess. Lunch and recess are fun activities. Nobody realized they are so overstimulating, or it didn't, they probably knew it, but it just didn't come into their mind of like, oh, well, maybe she's overstimulated from lunch and recess. And so once we talked through that, we said, okay, she's going to leave recess 5 minutes early. She's going to go to the counseling office and she's going to color or do, whatever she needs to do, play a game, color, do something to regroup herself, and then go to math class. Problem solved. Instead of but it's again looking at the whole picture of what happens before and why are we at such a level.
And another thing, speaking of math, that I've seen is there's some really gifted students who are gifted in math, gifted in like visualizing, so they do it in their head, and then they are ridiculed for doing it differently. And I'm just like, well, especially if they have an IEP, there's usually like a accommodation or modification that says alternative ways of learning. So can't they just explain it to you? It's like, and then these kids end up really frustrated in math. They think they're not good at it. And like I said before, it's these, it makes them feel like they're stupid when they're actually smarter. And then there's that disconnect. And I think that happens to a lot of PDAers with, and it's just awful. It's the
ability, like, it's also like they make you show your work. Well, some math people can't. They don't know how to break it down. They see the problem and they solve it. I remember when I was in math in undergrad, I was an education major. Both my parents were math people. And so numbers was a big thing in my family. It did not come naturally to me. It was very difficult for me, but I learned it and I figured out how it worked for my brain. So I figured out different ways of doing it. And our math teacher was a mathematician. And I remember him going over an assignment one time and I went, well, wait a minute, this is how I did it. He's like, it doesn't work. I'm like, well, I did it that way for my entire homework assignment and I got everything right. And he was just pissed and annoyed of like this little undergrad teacher major is proving a mathematician wrong. Whatever. Okay, fine. That's your problem, not mine. I remember he did our exam on Yom Kippur. And I'm like, excuse me, like that's Yom Kippur. He's like, I don't have to move it. I just have to give you the opportunity to take it. I'm like, okay, fine. Like, I'm not going to fight this guy. And so I took the exam separately. And when I brought it back, he's like, you rushed it. You need to go finish work more. So I went back and sat down for 20 minutes and like, brought it back again. And then he's like, well, I'm just going to grade this right here. And I got a 98%. He was not a happy camper, but it's like, it comes back to what is going on here and what are we trying to prove? Like, the way teachers are teaching, it doesn't always work. And that's alternative ways of showing what you've learned. Also, that there is none for math because, again, you get credit for the right answer or wrong answer, and then you get credit for the work shown work. So a kid can get 100%, but since they couldn't show their work on anything, they're getting 50% on the test.
Yeah.
And why is this learning?
Why is this?
Like, why is this learning? Like, why is this matter? You know what I mean? Like, it just so like, for example, my daughter came home and she had a D in math, and both my kids excel at math. And this is my older one. And I'm like, yo, what happened? And she goes, oh, Mom, it's fine. I wasn't there the day they learned how to do it, but now I know what I did wrong and I know how to do it. Okay, great. But she still has a D.
Yeah.
So, but she understands it now. What's more important here?
Right. I think something that kind of gets lost in the education world is that when a teacher walks into that classroom that day, what is the purpose of them being there? I find that there's like this idea that we're not here to teach this subject. We're actually here to teach students how to, be, good workers as adults, and but that's often not communicated. But then you might have another teacher, someone like me, who is actually trying to build skills. I'm very skill based. That's how I operate. So it's like educators need to consider that. So like your professor, he is he there to teach math? Or is he there to teach compliance? Is he, people need to like think about, what are you actually teaching? What is your goal? Like, we have goals, but really, what is your goal inside? So something also I want to say is something that especially interests me is bottom up versus top down processing. So what that essentially means is how we process information. Now, everybody's a little bit of both in theory, but then some of us are more dominant, bottom up dominant, top down. And what that means, like I said earlier about the input and output of the brain, bottom up thinkers tend to be very detail oriented. They focus on those sensory details first, put them together, and then they come up with the big picture. Whereas top down, that way is, you're like, if you think of a KWL chart, what do you already know about this topic? Like, people automatically go and think about past experiences and start with the whole and then break it down. And schools tend to be biased towards top down, but I find a lot of autistic learners are bottom up. And I'm not just saying that too, like research shows that. So I think that's a big disconnect. But that's the thing, in school, teachers don't learn that. So they're not at fault for this, and and the system's not built around for different learning styles, really. So math, maybe like someone just needs it taught differently. I am not good at math. I was diagnosed with a math disability. But I do often wonder, like, well, what if it was taught in a different sequence or something, would that, because I'm definitely very bottom up. So I don't know. Yeah.
Right. And that's like, it's so frustrating because like the new math, although I think they just changed it again, but the math curriculum they were doing at some point with my kids was, okay, we're going to learn how to do it this way. Then we're going to learn how to do it this way. Then we're going to learn how to do it this way. And I'm like, okay, but if A already works, why do they have to learn B and C? The idea is a great idea because everybody learns differently. Some learn A, some learn B, some learn C. That doesn't mean you need to force all kids to learn A, B, and C. It means we're going to teach these 3-day ways. Now you do what works for you and see if you get to the answers. But that's not the way it's set up. Teachers are very set up, and it's not, I don't blame the teachers because it's the way the curriculum's set up. Like it's just very like, you have to do this, and then you have to teach this, and then you have to teach that. And that's where our education system is so failing our children, because they don't take into consideration how our children learn and how the teachers teach.
Yeah.
Because they're very different. Every teacher has a different teaching style. Every learner has a different learning style. Let's match teaching styles to learning styles. Wouldn't that be something?
Yeah, or even,
oh,
I'm sorry.
No, go
even
ahead.
like
No,
even methods. Like I have this chart, and you would not believe how many ways there is to learn. You have like discussion-based learning, you have problem-based learning, you have project-based learning, you have traditional learning. That's just a few. And but the way things are, and then funding, if funding's even going to be more decreased, then it's like we're really stuck here, because that would involve like multiple choices in like programming in a school, and it's so complex. We would, in order for all that to happen, we'd have to just have a clean slate, and that is right now, at least, that's really impractical. I don't know how that's going to work, and it's really sad. Also, I want to say too, people may say, oh, well, we've always done it this way, and prior generations were fine. I mean, I will say there has been legislation, like even since I graduated in 2007, that did influence the way things are. However, I also would say, well, think about these kids have been, their face have been in a phone or an iPad since the very beginning. How is that impacting our brains? They're doing more research on that. And so, everyone's brain might be a little more overstimulated now because of that. And so, it's not the same. It's not the same, so we need to teach differently.
And it's also, look at how society is and look at what the environment is. People are like, we've always done it that way. And it was, we'll go to age, and sorry for all of you that are the older parents like I am. Like I graduated high school in 88, right? So how many years ago is that? A lot, 40 years ago. Well, now for those of you graduated around in the 80s, we're the same distance now as for the 40s. And I remember the 80s right? Like when you think of it like that and look back 40 years on how different the world was in that. Now, because we're living it, it's different. We see the gradual changes. But thinking of where we were in the 80s to where we are now, I mean, cell phones. We have and what they do, like from when they first started to what they do now, the internet, computers, everything, like to just say, oh, well, we've been doing this since the 50s. But look at our world and how different, you know what I mean? Like, but the world has changed. Why haven't we as an education system changed with it, at least to some degree, incorporating it? And then, of course, now, I mean, that's a whole nother topic about like screen time and using screens and not using screens. But like, it's take into consideration where we are now and how kids are learning now and what they have information on their fingertips like this. That takes a different type of teaching to these kids.
That's why I think, especially with AI, I actually support using AI in the classroom, not only because it looks like it's here to stay and they need to be educated. There's a real thing. AI literacy is a real thing. And that's now, I think more than ever, it is about skill building and problem solving and critical thinking, rather than teaching like facts. It's more about those skills because we have those facts. But how do we know which facts are true and what isn't? How do we know if the AI is being accurate or not? How do we double check things? I was always very big on that when I taught English. Like, I always talked about fact versus opinion and bias, and all those skills are just really important.
AI doesn't know that. They don't know sarcasm. They don't know
Okay.
satire. They're taking it all as real. And that's a
Mhm.
challenge. There was somebody, and I know Kevin will go back and figure out which one and do the link. I had somebody on my show that had developed an app for teachers that was basically an AI app. But the way it worked was you uploaded like the textbook and any supplemental information. And so the app could act like the teacher at the kid's fingertips, but only pulled information from what was uploaded by the teacher.
Oh, okay.
That makes sense. Right. So, like, you didn't get information from everywhere else. You got, like, this is what the teacher taught. Here are the teacher notes. Here's the classroom book.
Cool.
Here are this. So, when you put in a question, like that, you would, like, oh, I got to wait till tomorrow to ask my teacher. If you're doing homework at 10 o'clock at night, you can put in the question in this app and it would give you the answer based on what the teacher information was put in there, which is really
That's good.
cool. Right?
Yeah. It's something like I've thought about, and maybe it exists already. I don't know. Things called Magic School. I got introduced to that last semester in my like sped tech class. And so cool. So it might actually be on there what I'm talking about, but it would be really cool for a teacher to be able to go in and manipulate the AI and tell them, do research through AI. But have the AI purposely give false information for certain things. So the actual, what it's actually happening is teaching critical thinking and practicing that skill. And as the teacher, you have control over it. So you know what's right and what's wrong. I think that would be really cool.
That would be, that goes back to one of my dad's favorite sayings was trust but verify. And so that would be like being able to teach, like, okay, here's what AI told you. Now let's verify what AI said. And like, I like AI also. I use it often, but I know what I'm putting in and I know what I'm expecting out. So it's a little bit different. Like, you know what I mean? So like if I'm writing something, I know like these are the cases that we need to use, or these, well, I don't use it for case law stuff, but you know what I mean? But like, I also know how to, okay, it said these cases. Now let me go read these cases and make sure what it's saying is exactly what this is saying. Because sometimes they take the dissent as the actual case law, and that's not what it is. That's dissenting. That's not what the case law is, and it's, again, trust but verify. You can use it. It can give you the basic starting ground, but you have to be able to then know how to decipher, is this real? Is it not real?
Yeah.
Great skill.
Also, like AI is really inconsistent. Like I used to actually have a subscription, and I stopped because ChatGPT is my favorite. And I would notice that it would go through periods where it was less accurate, it was forgetting things, and then other times where it's totally on point, and it's like, that's not gonna work. And that's just gonna confuse people. Like, when do we trust it? When do we don't trust it? When, and you should verify, but let's be real, a lot of us don't do that all the time. And there's so much to learn about it. And the schools are not, there was a law passed, you probably know about this, that technology is not, at least cell phones, but it might be like technology is not allowed in the classroom. Except I think maybe like the school laptop. I don't know exactly, but I don't know how they're going to force that. However, it feels like they're teaching more like celibacy with AI. You know what I mean? Like, and it's like, well, we know what happened and with other things we did that with, look at the like DARE program and stuff, and it always backfired. And AI is just, it's so powerful. We need our students. I don't know how we got on this tangent, but it is important to talk about.
Well, but that's the way it is with everything in education. Like, to try and say to the kids, you can't read this, you can't do this, is never going to work. Because what's the first thing they do? Is they're going to do it. Wet paint. What's the first thing all of us do? Even adults. Is it really wet? You know what I mean? Like, we all touch it. And that's the thing, like saying you can't. Whereas if we teach how to responsibly use it,
Mm-hmm.
That's the idea of like, instead of saying you can't use it at all, and then they're going to use it and they're going to get caught and whatever, let's teach them how to responsibly use it. You can use AI. Here's how you can use it. And here's how to verify it,
Mm-hmm.
and that's, but that's the thing, but that's all like bringing it back to what we were originally talking about is like, that's all about education of like, what is the purpose of teaching? Are you really there so that the kids memorize the history? Or are you there to teach the concept of what happened in history so history doesn't repeat itself? What's
Yeah.
more important here?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why, like, just skills, we got to do that more.
Yeah.
But I think we'd have to rewrite a lot of curriculum. And once again, it's almost
You're
like
doing.
talking about like the electric grids, their infrastructure is not strong enough for AI. Well, our learning infrastructure and our
Exactly.
educational infrastructure, it's the same thing. And it's gonna be expensive, which I don't know why education has to be so expensive. Like, I am big on like play-based approaches. Even for older, it
Yeah.
just looks different than a little kid. But it's like you can go in the grocery store and teach, so it's just,
To
we need to
me,
rethink it. I don't know.
yeah. To me, schools are constantly changing curriculums and making teachers learn this new. I mean, they just did a new
Yeah.
math curriculum, and at sneak peek, I'm asking the teacher, "Well, how is this going to work?" They're like, "We're not exactly sure yet. We're going to kind of figure it out." I'm like, "Why is
Yeah.
this acceptable?" Like, teachers go through training. They are certified teachers. Let the teachers teach. Don't
Yeah.
force these curriculums down their throat. Like, go back to the old days of like the teacher assessing all the kids. I'm like, okay, these kids need to learn this way. These kids, not even necessarily at an ability level, but the way they learn, and let the teachers pick what curriculum works for them.
Yeah.
Because forcing them to do a curriculum that doesn't work for them, they're not going to be teaching it well.
I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, so I'm going to try to
Yeah.
restrain myself from going deep down there. However, because I'm very passionate about this, but like there was legislation that replaced No Child Left Behind, and it requires evidence-based practices. However, that the like the way for something to be considered evidence-based, there's really not very, like, it just needs like one experimental study basically.
Yeah.
And the studies can be biased and done by the companies. So I think what happens is, it's like big pharma, big, it's and so they have representatives come out to the schools and sell them these products.
Yep.
And then someone might be like, hey, like your phone plan, like, oh, this is, we're going to give you this deal. And then like 2 years later, oh, the deal's over. So let's jump ship and go to another one we can get a good deal on. It's just, I think that we're putting capitalism over our students' needs.
Yeah.
So
No, I agree. Yeah, but it's true. It's again going back to like, ooh, shiny, new product. You know what I mean? Like and that's what the school systems are doing. They're like, oh, well, our math scores slipped a little bit. Let's go find a different math curriculum and teach it a different way. It's like, that's not the solution. How about
yeah,
putting the money towards making smaller class sizes? How about putting aides in every classroom because teachers are already overworked and underpaid? Let's put in
yeah,
aides so that they can implement the IEPs correctly and they have the
yep,
support they need to collect the data.
yeah.
Instead of putting all this money into these curriculum and forcing them, but that's a whole nother conversation that we could do a whole show.
It's a rabbit hole.
Yes,
I wrote a
exactly.
whole essay on it once, though. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, no, and yeah, that's a whole, we can do another show on that one. But this has been like, thank you so much for Sarah for coming on the show. This has been like so
No
awesome.
problem.
I love talking to you. And I think we got a lot of good information out there for our listeners.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, I just see a need for change, and I saw a need, and so that's really what I want to do with my practice and my business, and I'm here to help. So
Thank you. And,
Yeah.
I totally forgot to ask. So for people that are watching the show and like, oh, I
Mhm.
connect with her. This is who I need for my child. What's the best way for people to reach you?
Yeah, so I have a website. So www autonomoushippo.com. That's the website. I do have social media. Maybe I can get those links for you. Like I don't,
Yep.
but my website has my links and everything too.
Perfect.
But it is kind of bright and overstimulating for some people, but that's our theme. Being
We'll have,
colorful and
yeah,
standing out because we're different. So
that's
yeah.
awesome. We'll have all the links. Yeah, we'll get them to Kevin, and Kevin will make sure he puts all the links on for the show notes.
Mhm.
So thank you, Sarah, so much for being on
Yeah.
the show.
Thank you so
And
much for inviting me.
course. And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Stress Free IEP. We hope today's conversation gave you new tools, insights, or just a little more peace of mind as you support your neurodivergent child. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you found this episode helpful, please share it with someone in your village. Next week, we're going to have episode 158, where Justin H. Dove is going to talk about independent evaluations and parent advocacy. You can always learn more and connect with me on schefterlaw.com or follow along on social media. Until next time, remember, you do not have to do it all alone.
Bye.